Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Know the Rules of the Game podcast for leadership in turbulent times. I'm your host, Desiree Patno, CEO and President of Women in the Housing Real Estate Ecosystem and AWRB, and Desiree Patno Enterprises, Inc. for real estate brokerage and advisor and investor for Amicus Brain, AI for Aging Population, and Chief Strategic Officer for Zulu Time and publisher of NWRB Magazine and the Weir Report. Today, we are so honored to have our guest, Noel Massie, author, speaker, retired Vice President of U.S. Operations for UPS, and Kelly Amont, our NDLC Council member, former UPS Vice President of U.S. Sales. Welcome, Noel and Kelly.
Good morning.
I know, quit laughing. I know, I already blew it with the Noel. So sorry about that. When you have a niece that's named Noel, it's going to be, I cut it halfway in the end of it. So welcome again. I hear, Noel, that you have been instrumental in your career at UPS and would love for you to take this time to introduce Noel and how his leadership has impacted you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Desiree, again for having me on. I was fortunate enough to meet Noel Massie when he relocated from being the president of Virginia to being the president of Southeastern California. And I ended up working directly for Noel. And I've got to say, it was really one of the best leadership styles that I have ever worked with. He has truly become not only a great mentor, but a great friend. And I'm thrilled that he's able to share some of his leadership expertise with everyone here on the call. So I'm very excited as well that he is now an author and a speaker. I think he can really help a lot of folks. And with that, Desiree, I'll turn it over to you if you want to talk a little bit just about his background.
Absolutely. He's been, the conversation we had, Noel, before we got on to the podcast, the gelling of what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're doing it, your leadership that you've ran through so many different things. It was such an incredible opportunity to get to know a little bit more about your background. And Kelly, I cannot amplify how happy I am for the introduction, because when I found out where you've been in the sense of where your family is and the environment that we could talk about shared ideals and principles, and also the ideas of where we've gone, I was just so overwhelmed and so excited to get that done. So, and that being said, I would really like to hone in on as far as the background, to dive in a little bit as we go through this, if you don't mind, Noel, is that your background has been such an incredible time. So I would like you to talk about what amplifies you versus, and we can read your bio. So if you don't mind, take it away on something that really strikes of what's giving for the current times that really amplifies that you think would be so powerful to our listeners today.
Well, first of all, I want to, thank you for the opportunity today to speak to your membership. I think these times really, are driving communication in ways that we haven't seen. I don't think in our history, actually, right? We have a national pandemic. It's the first time in my lifetime that I've seen such a thing, and I would surmise that it goes that way for most Americans. But I'm really pleased to be here today with you and with Kelly. And I appreciate the introduction that Kelly gave, as she talked about a number of things as a mentor. And all I know is when I was her boss. When I was her boss, okay, it was a daily educational, challenging experience, right? And I learned as much. I did learn as much from Kelly as I think I ever gave to her. I think she's a great leader, just amazing with people, and I think she has a lot on her own right to be able to talk to leadership. But that being said, I started my career in Oakland, California in 1977. I was a college student at the time at San Jose State, and UPS was hiring. Quite frankly, I had just finished a year-long internship at IBM. My degree of study was electrical engineering. And so I came into UPS at 19 years old after that internship. And, I had a 42-year career, and it was amazing. I wouldn't change a thing about it. But certainly as I went through my career from being a supervisor in 1980 to a manager in 84. And then I became what we call a division manager in 88 with an operating division, which typically is around 1,000 people. And then in 97, I was promoted to president of Chicago, the Chicago area, Metro Chicago, we called it. And from that time on, I had 5 business units as a president until I was promoted in 2016 to vice president of U.S. operations, responsible for the couple of 100,000 people that do our day-to-day delivery and pickup operation. And so through all of those 42 years, I certainly went through a number of turbulent times. The most turbulent thing I went through early in my career was the Bay Bridge earthquake, the 1988 earthquake in California. Yeah. And I was a division manager in 1988. I was 30 years old, and I had 1,200 people under me at that point. And that was a very dramatic thing in the Bay Area, right? The Bay Bridge, the Bay Area earthquake. We call it the earthquake in the Bay, and so a number of other challenges that when I faced them as I went through my career, I learned a lot from that first moment in '88. So when I went through Hurricane Isabel in Virginia, I was a leader in Virginia at the time that hurricane came through and devastated the state. And then, of course, on a national level, I've been involved in a number of big disaster type events down in the Houston area when the floods came, in Florida. My role was to navigate that stuff, right? And right. So I don't know that a lot of people get a chance to even do something like that, right? To sit at the point when there's a disaster. And I've done that. And I've learned a few things, I think, along the way. And, I hope to share some of that with your audience. So that's kind of a quick topical, around my career and, some of the things that I've been able to experience in it that were disaster type situations and crises. And I think a 3-foot snowstorm can be a crisis. I mean, it doesn't have to be something like a pandemic. When it comes to leadership, what that amounts to is someone's in a role that they asked for, number one, to be a leader. That's important to make a point of. And then a crisis comes, right? And right. It's uncomfortable, and there's a million questions, and people are asking you stuff, and so hopefully today we can talk about. I sent three points of reference for this morning that really are in the book I'm writing. I'm writing a book. I hope to be able to release it early next year, and it's on leadership. And the things I'm going to talk about are actually in my book and topics in my book.
Excellent. So some of the things I like to go over. So thank you very much. I love to hear it from your voice on what those things that were so important to you than reading someone's bio, because it really amplifies your, we are so needing of other interactions right now. And this is so important. And I think that's part of the crises that are going through right now. A couple of things you hit on though, that are, again, is just amplifying our connectivity. Electrical engineering. My father had a degree in electrical engineering. So it's kind of like I'm going, okay, we're getting similarities are just coming along, Kelly. Yeah. And I love the point that you talked about 3-foot snow can be considered a disaster, because if you think about the floods, the water, what, UPS, as we all think of as the brown truck, making deliveries, which obviously, Kelly, we know is so much more than that. But the idea is that, and we talk about that in the leadership council, but, how do you get your deliveries? How do you pick up things? That is so important. How a road washes out, the drone aspect of using it now. So there's just so much out there. So I love that aspect. And the other thing is that, your book, coming out, having your book come out next year, it's so important that, one of the things that we talk about our principles is playing it forward, having the idea of teaching and moving. And I really believe right now that you can never get enough of the information that what you went through and bring it to the forefront, regardless of gender. And so thank you for that, because when I read your 3 rules leading through these turbulent times, it was so powerful that I just really want to dive into that. So thank you for that. So number 1, you said all times as a leader, these things will apply, and in a crisis, they apply on steroids. Number 1, the leader should understand fully what are the terms and conditions of the relationship that my people expect from me. If you don't fulfill these expectations, they won't fulfill their agreements. So take that away, Noel.
Yeah, that's correct. You know, that idea comes from, you think about everything that you've ever purchased in life. You know, you go buy a refrigerator, a car, a home, I don't care, and they offer you a warranty. And you go, yeah, I'm going to purchase that. Or not, right? But if you do purchase it, it's because you want whatever it is you bought to in some way be protected, and that it'll perform in the way that you bought it to perform. But when you read the contract, it has terms and conditions in it. You know, you buy an app today, it has terms and conditions in it. You know, everything that you go out and purchase, there are terms and conditions. Well, you know, quite frankly, when you hire an employee and you say, hey, I'm going to hire you to do X, Y, construction worker, to be a UPS driver, whatever it is, what leaders fail typically to understand is there are terms and conditions. And they're not just the ones that the company is placing on the employee to perform the work. Of course, you hire someone to perform work. I mean, that's just what you do. I mean, you can't run your company without the most important ingredient in it, which is a human being. And companies, as well as leaders, lose sight of that the most, actually. You know, that once the application's signed and the person's on board, you know, then it's like, well, you know, we're giving you something. Well, that's true, of course, obviously. They're giving them a job. But more importantly, that employee is giving the company something, and is giving the company the opportunity to be the company. I sat in so many meetings in my career where we would talk about things that were strategic and, you know, revenues and sales and operation results and blah, blah, blah. And you could sit in these meetings for an hour and no one would talk about, okay, so the people that actually do this job that's going to make those things occur, how are we going to talk to them? Because they have terms and conditions. And the fact of the matter is everyone does. I mean, you think about the relationships you have with your kids, you know, with your spouse, with your friends, there are terms and conditions in them things, right? You know, right. With your mom. I mean, just think about if you have parents and you didn't call them for a whole year. I think probably they would say that those are not the terms and conditions of the relationship. You know, I think
today. Sorry.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, you know, and so I wanted to put it in a context that I think was understandable for people. We're all familiar with the contract, the black and white in the warranties with terms and conditions. And I wanted to use that phraseology to make this point, is that when an employee understands what the organization wants, they're obviously going to be knowledgeable about what that is. However, the employee has terms and conditions that must be met in order to fulfill them. It's just the way it works. They expect to be trained. They expect to be supported. They expect communication to be a two-way street. They expect those terms and conditions to just be understood. And oftentimes they're not. And I used to see this a lot. You know, over my career, I had thousands of managers work for me over the years, thousands, you know, and I'm not embellishing, you know, any part of that, let alone the couple 100,000 people that I was responsible to the CEO and the management committee of UPS for over the last few years. You know, and any and everything we wanted to execute, the most important thing was to make sure that the person at the very core of what it was, the driver, the employee, the clerical person, whoever it was,
right,
that they understood directionally what we were trying to accomplish, how they fit into that, the role they would play in that, and if there was going to be training, how we were going to deliver that. And that was never easy. None of that was ever easy to do. But those are terms and conditions that you just kind of got to start the conversation with. And so the intent of that chapter in my book is really to set the tone for the leader. To say, you know, you when there was a job open to be the leader, you raised your hand. You said, hey, pick me, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know too many people that are in a leadership position, you know, and you could be that example, or Kelly, where they said, hey, you better take this job as CEO or we're going to fire you. Okay, you better be the vice president or you are out of here, right? We're going to fire you if you don't, you know, maybe that happens, but that's generally not what goes on. You know, so people raise their hand and go, pick me, you know, and if you pick somebody else, I'm going to be angry at you because you didn't pick me. And, you know, I'm the best person for the job, so pick me. And then they get this job to be a leader of five people or 5,000 people. It doesn't matter. Leadership's leadership. And immediately what they expect the employees to do is to adhere to their terms and conditions. And the employees, you know, they can't typically vocalize that, okay, that's a joke, all right? You know, this is a two-way street, right? That there's not this one-way street, that it's a two-way street. But typically leaders will take a job and say, here are my terms and conditions, and you just better follow them. And the employees in their mind go, okay, well, we have them too. And it'll be silent, though. It'll be silent. And when
you don't want to be a comic?
Yeah. Yeah.
When the leader violates that stuff, they act out in all kinds of ways that we know are obvious, where they grumble, they mumble, you know, they immediately distance themselves from the leader. You know, they have a low belief system in the person's values. And it all started right at the beginning of the relationship with what are the terms and conditions. And how as a leader, because there's some natural ones that matter, and how as a leader are you going to understand what those are, you know, communicate with your people to get to that place where we all understand what that looks like, whether it's a daily meeting where we communicate for 30 minutes, or, you know, whether it's a weekly meeting, whether it's a, you know, who's facilitating it, how are we going to exchange ideas? I mean, all of those things are part of this. And so that's what, you know, I made as rule number one, because it really is number one. You know, it's not a casual number one, it's rule number one, that you need to understand the terms and conditions that your people have of you. You know, what are those? You know, if they're unreasonable, then you get an opportunity to be able to you know, consider what that is in the conversation. But you really have to understand fully, you know, what they are, what those relationships require. And if you don't do that, then your people won't support whatever terms and conditions you think you put on them. And then that creates poor work to the customer, or poor work which extends itself into the customer, maybe product, you know, development, whatever it is they do for you, they are not going to do it really, really well if you're violating their personal terms and conditions as people. It's just not going to happen.
You know, I would add, at a time when our society is all about instant gratification, I think what Noel's talking about here is, you know, leaders taking the time, right, to get to know their people so they do understand the terms and conditions. And I think, you know, that's kind of sometimes a lost art. I mean, a lot of leaders don't want to take the time to really get to know their people. And I think this is a great point, because you can't know the terms and conditions unless you do take the time.
Well, yeah, you know, and just to accentuate the point that Kelly just made is, clearly, if you were to talk to 1,000 employees in 100 different companies and say, you know, what are your terms and conditions at this company to be really good at your job? They would have an answer to that. And then if you went to their direct report and said, okay, tell me what that person's terms and conditions are, 99 out of 100 times, actually it's higher, wouldn't know. And I used to challenge the people that worked for me about that. And what I would do is I'd take a manager and I'd go over to a driver or whatever, and I'd go, so how's it going? You know, small talk, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, so, well, you know, I mean, so what does Ray, your manager, really expect, you know, on a day-to-day basis from you? And then they would, you know, say, oh, do a good job, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, that's great. But what is that anyway? You know, just give me some idea of what that is. You know, and how do you expect your boss to interact with you once a week, twice a week, once a month, whatever it is? And there'd be a shallow answer to that. And so my point is that would always be a teaching moment whenever I did it. And that's where that really kind of all came together for me, with the terms and conditions piece. It just fell on me. I was just thinking about the narrative years ago, and that came into my head.
I love it.
Just to Kelly's point, just to accentuate the point I think Kelly just made, was what those, couple of reference points were directed towards.
Agreed. And so that's incredible, the two of you. I mean, I'll just sit back and let you two go at it. But there's something you said, Noel, that just really hit me in so many ways. I mean, there's several things, but the one that stood out is employee giving you the ability to be the company. The two-way street of communication back and forth, understanding that the terms and conditions is so simple, but as you said, number one in its entirety, because you could see the tight ship. One of the things I talked to Kelly about was when I went to Wise Place at the dinner table, and there was two sets of, I think we had 24 UPS employees there. The family there was just incredible, how the respect of everyone, the interaction with everyone. And I could see that coming, part of your bio is 200,000 employees out of 450,000 employees. That connectivity of understanding exactly what's to be expected from the leadership down, you've defined it in such an articulate, perfect way that I just sat there and got chills because of how the interaction of I experienced that through Kelly and what we went through. And Kelly, you can amplify that. When I was there, that's all I could talk about was how everyone respected each other, and it was the family of family. And I made a comment to everyone while you were there.
Yeah. It's UPS has a long tradition of supporting the community, and although we didn't mention it, Noel certainly continued that tradition with his work as, the leader of the LA Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. And I just think that when employees feel part of something, right, then they absolutely give that discretionary effort. So it's an important piece, knowing those terms and conditions of your people.
Yeah, I mean, and the amplification of you saying it, Noel, is how you went through and dissected the terms and conditions, your contract. And, it's like, okay, now that I've won them over, we're good. We can just continue on, and they have to do as said. But like you said, the distancing continues to grow if it's not set up at front, and then you can maximize your company output by taking, as Kelly put, get to know your employees, take the time to understand what the challenges are, so you can be a family as a second family versus then being disconnected. The tighter you can run, the expectation, understanding, I have a relationship with my crew that before I finish a sentence, they understand, they know what I'm going to finish the sentence off with. That interaction is very, very, very important.
And that really leads to that second rule that Noel had on here, that, leaders must make certain their messaging is clear. I don't know, Noel, if you want to step into that, but that's it leads right into it.
Yeah. Just before we get into that, I'll just land the terms and conditions part of this discussion as we transition to that, just on this point. Because I want the listeners to not see this as a Pollyanna kind of deal, because it's not, and I'm not saying that's how it's been framed, but I want to take it down another level and say, we all know when those have been violated. Everyone's had someone reach out to them, and it'd be a friend or a parent, and they call you, right? And you're busy, and you don't, you go, I'll call you back later. And then it's like 2 days later. No, really. And in your head, there's this radar going off, right? Like, okay, there's this radar going off. Like, oh, I need to call this person. I didn't call them back. And it's not and it starts to, because in your heart and in your mind's eye, you just violated terms and conditions. You know it. And if they're unhappy, you get it, right? There's no, and the same thing happens when something in your house breaks, right? You break, the refrigerator breaks, or, your car breaks, and you say, well, the warranty's going to cover that, right? And they go, well, no. You go, wait a minute. Okay, I purchased this warranty, and it's going to pay for this. And they're like, no, the one thing you're not is happy with that. Okay. And when your employees hear you say something contrary to what they believed, whether it was how they got scheduled days off, or who picked vacation, or when they were going to get paid, or if their check was wrong, when it was going to get fixed, when you violate any part of that, there's residue. And that residue will last into that relationship until you mitigate it. And so when you feel uncomfortable, that's when you know. When a person approaches you and they're in your team or they work for you and you're uncomfortable with them, it's because on some level, the terms and conditions are not understood, you haven't clarified them, and there's a discomfort there. And so the whole point would be to solve for improving those terms and conditions. Wouldn't just be understanding them. That's obviously important, but it really comes down to deal with them. Deal with them. Don't let them stay uncomfortable, right? Be transparent, be honest, have humility, and admit your mistakes, because when you admit them, then people generally will forgive them and allow you to move forward. So the messaging piece that Kelly brought up, we'll move into that. So yeah, I said that rule 2 for me was leaders must make certain their messaging is clear. Now that seems like a simple thing, but it's not. Because the way that we teach leaders to communicate typically to teams is, hey, here's a message, give it to them, right? Here's a memo,
Take it.
Down, give it to them, I mean, in the group that Kelly worked in, they were famous for that. Memos would come out every single day, and they would be contrary to the one yesterday, right?
He's been watching you.
Oh yeah. I just had too many meetings where she came into my office, with her hair on fire, ranting and raving about it. Oh my God, look now. Look what's coming out from this group now, right? And then it's affecting like 1,000 people. So one day the people hear X, and then the next day Y. But the leader's job is important in this way, that you don't get to pass the buck. You just don't. You don't get to say, here's a memo, I'm going to read it to the team, and if they think this message stinks, it's not my fault. It's whoever, the corporate office. It's the boss. It's the head. It's the people at the top. It's the owner of the business. I don't care who it is. It doesn't need to be a corporation. It could be a small company with 5 people. That someone's given them the message, and it came from somewhere, and they passed it up, and everyone didn't like it, or it was a lack of clarity, and it was not directional enough, and the leader passes the buck. When the leader passes the buck, the employees will pass the buck back to you. That's just how that works. Whether you think they did or not, they did. They slipped it in your back pocket, but it's there. And so when I say communicating, make sure your messaging is clear, supported, and digestible. And that's important, because I would often be in meetings and watch the behavior and observe people. And this is where this came from for me, right? I had a manager once, and I talk about this in my book back in the mid 80s, that this guy gave me indigestion. I mean, in a mental way. Like, he gave me mental indigestion. And so that's where that came from for me, because I've experienced it, right? And so I tried to put it in a context that the reader or the audience would understand in this way, is that think about when you've eaten a meal and it was just disagreeable with your metabolism. It just did not agree with you. You got sick. It gave you indigestion. You felt horrible. And here's the last thing you wanted to do after that experience, is have a conversation that was positive, right? It wasn't going to happen. Hey, I know you got indigestion right now, but can we talk about this business matter? Ain't going to happen. It's not. Okay. So when I think about messaging, what the point is to the leader is, don't give your people indigestion. Just know that when you talk to your team or your group or an individual, you can see if they are digesting the message. You can see it on their face. It's visible. You can see if they're buying into it, with body language, with head going up and down, or, asking for points of clarity.
Right.
and you can see it.
Yep.
But you'll only see it if you want to see it. If you're not interested in seeing it, they're going to know you're not interested in seeing it. And you are going down a path where you're going to create mental indigestion for that person. They won't understand what it is you want. They won't understand where this is going. And it's going to show up in how well they do all of those things. And it can even digress even further, where I've been in meetings where, you know, our typical day at UPS with our drivers or our employees starts with what we call a pre-work communications meeting. It's like 3 minutes. It's a short and sweet boom, you know, the daily message, 3 minutes.
Right.
And we call it the most important 3 minutes in the company, right? Because every day, 450,000 people get this 3-minute thing, or supposed to. And it's like sets the tone, sets the table, it's directional, it has messaging in it. And the fact shows that people don't retain a high degree of what's spoken to them, right? It's in the 30, right. It's in the 30% range. You know, and I would always use, as a way to point this out to the manager or supervisor, you know, I would use a phrase that I heard years and years ago that worked for me. And it went, you know, what you see, you remember. What you hear, you forget. But what you do, you know. what you do, you know, right? So yep. what you hear, you forget. What you see, you remember. What you do, you know. And so anytime you're having an audience with a group of people, then what's really important is points of clarity checks, right? To say, okay, so we just talked about the new procedure for having hand sanitizer in every vehicle, how you're going to use it during this pandemic, and how we're going to deliver to the front porch without making contact. And so that was the message today. So, okay, before we break, Tom, so tell me what was in the messaging. Then Tom will go blah, 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 blah. Okay, Judy, you tell me what you think got. And you're doing a clarity check, right? You're validating.
Right.
And you're not validating if they understood. You're validating if you did a good job delivering the message. Okay? You can't blame the listener. You can't blame, even though leaders do, they want to blame the listener and say, well, you weren't listening. I did a fantastic job of delivering that message. And you know why we're here and this is not going right? It's because they didn't listen. Right? How many times have you heard that comment?
Have you been listening behind have you been a fly on my wall? Okay. No, I want to know.
Right? They didn't listen. I did a fantastic job delivering this message, and they didn't listen, so they didn't digest it. No. You gave the message, and maybe you gave them indigestion while you were doing it, right? And I used to stand and watch these conversations, you know, as Vice President of U.S. Operations, and it wouldn't be for any other purpose than to see how well the person was doing it, and if they needed tips on how to do it better, not to criticize. Anybody can criticize. The easiest thing in the world to do is criticize. The harder thing is, how do you help the person get better at whatever it is? And so role playing, make sure that when you're giving a message to a group, you know, practice it on someone, practice it on yourself, practice it in a mirror, practice it with your family, practice it with a colleague. But don't think you're just all that because you have a memo you're about to read, right? Or you have an instruction you're about to give. And communication is everything in a relationship. And we talked about that on terms and conditions. Well, you know, the second level of it is make sure your messaging that you gave is effective, right? And the only way you're going to make sure it's effective is if you test for it by asking the audience, okay, you know, what did we talk about? You know, is there anything I left out? Any other questions you have, as opposed to this directional kind of way that a lot of leaders are taught. And then you can see when there's indigestion in the audience because they'll be shaking their head. You can see that they'll be glancing to the left or to the right, looking up at the ceiling. What they won't be doing is listening to you and the message you have, because you're giving them indigestion with it. And it's important that you can see that. It's observable. Just like when someone really gets it and they just ate a meal, right? You can see it on their face. You know, somebody's at your dinner table and it's like not going well, you know.
Yeah. Wait, and you know, Noel, but you also said supported, and I think you do a great job of that too. And I think most leaders do, in the sense that, you know, your message has to be supported. You have to tell the people why. You know, there have been so many great TED Talks and things about telling people why, because if people understand why and your message is supported, it makes it much more digestible, to your point.
The best talk I've ever heard on that point Kelly just made is by an author and speaker named Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. And I recommend to everyone listening to this podcast to go to YouTube and pull up Simon's talk on Start With Why. It's a beautiful talk. It's precise. It's really about how human beings are built, I guess is the point. But Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, and his YouTube video, his TED Talk, clarifies that in a way that I've never heard. I've had people watch it, you know, that work for me, and I've looked at it, you know, many times over the last decade. But that just goes to what Kelly's talking about, is that's validated. There's a validated science on why starting with why is number one.
Yeah, this has been incredible. I mean, you sound like Desiree talk. No, you have quantified, first starting off with the 2 days later calling the daughter or calling someone we forgot to call, that guilt. That's all of us, you know. Oh yeah, it's just my sister, my brother, my mother, whatever. I'll call her back and I'm doing something else. You know, that prioritizing time of what's value it, because I'm doing, you know, we're multitasking, especially in today's environment. And some of the other things that you touched on that were so powerful, that you have a way that delivery is so unique. Your terms and conditions, it continues to resonate with everything you've said, that breaking it down and we go into that messaging of clarity. I have never, in all of the years of travel for the last 30 years, I've listened to so many different incredible leaders and speakers delivering the message, whether it was with a gender lens, whether it was connectivity, that you have this clarity of being able to present that's so resonant. I feel like I'm sitting in a mentorship program privately to me and listening and taking notes as fast as I can, because not only with humor, but you're bringing it with a level of I could just see everything that I've ever done. You're amplifying and saying, this is why, this is how, and this is the end result. It's incredible, Noel. You are just unbelievable. So thank you. Thank you. But some of the things that I really wanted to touch on was the guilt feeling that goes with it. We're talking about one of the principles we came up with, listen. You're so in the ideas is that when you said your 3-minute message going out as UPS to all 450,000, that connectivity just really hit me, saying everyone is in it together. We're going to send out whether that quote, that mission is, and what that ideology is going to be for that day. And then you asking the employees, you know, what did it mean to them and what did they take away from it? Was so powerful, like you said, about the conditioning of understanding the meaning of what the interpretation of it. And then what really closed it out for me is that, hey, I did a really good job of explaining it to you, but it's your problem that you didn't understand what I said. And you said, no, it's a delivery system. It's not, you know, it's the employee's problem for saying it back. So unbelievable. Kelly.
Well, yeah, and I also I just love the what you see, you remember, what you hear, you forget, but what you do, you know, and I think that's so critical as well. I mean, just great points, and it really, you know, we've seen some of the struggles with communication, right? As we all went through this pandemic, so I think all these points are great. Noel, I know then you kind of go into your point number 3 here, which was leaders must set direction for the team, and direction, that's a big topic. So maybe we want to start talking about that rule as well.
Oh, well, I think of all the points, you know, the 3, at least the 3 I'm covering today, of all the points, you know, this is where ownership is, right? And, you know, it goes back to that, you know, I would regularly, almost always would start a meeting out this way when I would travel from, you know, having the US as my territory the last 3 years before I retired from Seattle to Maine. You know, I'd be with a lot of groups. And I'd go in and I'd have town halls everywhere I went. I would always make myself available to the people who did the job on the floor the supervisors and the managers, right? You know, I wouldn't just meet with the president or their staff, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, and that stuff matters. Don't get me wrong. I'm not minimizing it. Maybe I'm guilty sometimes of leaning too much away from them, right? When I would go places, but I wanted to spend time where the work got done and where the driver lived and the preloader, the part-time employee, you know, that 20-year-old, right? I mean, so how many times would they get to meet someone from the corporate headquarters that was running the US? And I understood that because I had the place they were in before. So I got it. And it was just to avail myself to them. But I'd always start a meeting off with the supervisors. And I'd say, okay, so if you were made to take this job and we forced you, like I talked about earlier, upon that, unless you became a supervisor, we were going to terminate you. Raise your hand. Well, so I just want to be sure that we start off right and realize that you weren't forced to take this job, right? You know, you weren't forced to become the manager, right? So you wanted that promotion, right? And I'd say that, you know, to be sarcastic for a reason. Because, you know, when direction for the team would become a conversation and, you know, like now it's a crisis, right? So our people expect direction and they expect it from their immediate report. That's where they expect it from, not from the CEO of the company. They expect it from the person they see every day. And it was never lost on me that to the driver, the CEO of the company, to that driver was who they worked for. And the manager. It wasn't me, the president. It just wasn't. It wasn't the CEO in Atlanta, Dave Abney. It wasn't me when I was vice president of U.S. operations. It was the person they worked for. And that person was responsible for setting direction. Because recognize that discretionary choice is still part of what we do as humans, right? We get discretionary choice to do things. You know, up to the point where we all know that some people lose their jobs because they made a discretionary choice and they got fired over, right? Like not coming to work on time all the time, or, you know, or fudging numbers, or, you know, whatever, up to including maybe theft and all that kind of stuff. They made a choice. And it was always important to me to make a point to the leaders that, okay, so have you ever fired someone? They would go, yes. And why'd you fire them? Well, they didn't come to work on time. That's the easy one, right? When someone's late all the time. Undependability is like the easiest thing to let somebody go over. It just is. Now, the quality of the job they're doing, that's where it becomes difficult for leaders, right? But people make independent choices. So when the leader believes they're setting direction for the team, again, it goes back to this. Here's the direction we're going. These are the new rules, right? And the team, but the team on their own will decide, it's important, whether they follow that stuff. Okay. I mean, every place has reliability, you know, requirements. Every place you work in America, there's a requirement to be dependable. There's a requirement, you know, to do quality work. I mean, if it was as simple as sending them a memo, hey, here's the memo. Be on time every day, do a good job. Okay, if that's all you needed to do to lead, then we wouldn't have leaders. It would just be a computer-driven, memo-driven block, right? And it's not. Because someone's got to deliver that message, as we talked earlier, and set direction, as we're talking about now, that when people make discretionary choices, they follow it, right? They'll do it. And so when you're giving, as a leader, a message to your people, it's like this indigestion piece we talked about. Just know all day, they decide on their own if what you just said makes sense. They just do. They decide on their own if what you said makes sense. Because this is how it works, and we've all been here. Someone got up in front of the room. They gave a message, right? And then they've had this whole trail of poor leadership behaviors anyway. And so they give this message. And when that person leaves the room, everyone in the room looks at each other and goes, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me with what they just said? Are you kidding me? That doesn't even make sense. And so if it doesn't make sense, you know what it is, Desiree, to that person? It's nonsense.
Yep.
Yep.
Because
Well,
it either makes sense. Just embellish me for one more second here, because here's how people think. It either makes sense or it's nonsense. It's the opposite of making sense. And so who wants to believe that they just set direction to a group of people, drivers, employees in a warehouse, doesn't matter. And when you walked out of the room, if there was like one of these reality TV cameras in there, and you saw the room go, that's just nonsense. Blah, blah, blah. Who would do it the same after seeing that, right? So the point is the leader is responsible for setting the direction for the team, not that leader's boss, not that leader's boss's boss, not that leader's boss's boss's boss. It's that person that raised their hand, said, pick me, make me the leader. And then we said, okay, now, being the leader is setting direction for the team, right? I mean, that's what being a leader is. And, like today, we're going to go out in UPS vehicles, and because there's a thunderstorm and potential hazards that are reported to start at 5:30, we need to make all of our air pickups, our premium products, to get on the aircraft. We got to do them an hour early. And so the group goes out, and there's 100 drivers, and 80 of them pick up an hour early, and 20 of them didn't. Well, you know what? You're the leader. And those 20, you don't get to say they didn't listen. You don't get to whatever you said to them. All I know is this: 20 of them, 80 of them said, okay, that makes sense. But 20 of them said, that's nonsense. Okay. And you just need to understand that they didn't believe that what you said made sense. And ergo, it became to them nonsense. And when I would sit down with an employee, and then I'll land this here, because I would use that on employees throughout my career. I would sit down with them. Hey, Joe, come here. Hey, you come in, sit down, have a seat. Yep. How you doing today? Let's talk about blah. So, Joe, can you explain, when you have a procedure regarding, collection on delivery, a customer ordered a package, they got to pay for it. This was back in the day we used to do this. And it was $30 to get the package, and you gave them the package, they didn't give you $30. Joe, can you explain what the procedure, is on that? And then, they would always know it. I say, so tell me this, Joe. So if you were selling something personal, right? You sold something personal, and you gave it to the person, and they didn't give you a check or some money, would you let them have the product? Well, no. Okay, but Joe, you gave that customer that $30 package of Nike tennis shoes, and the agreement with the seller was collect a check on delivery. And you didn't collect the check on delivery. So make that make sense to me, Joe. And Joe would never be able to make that make sense. So I say, Joe, if it doesn't make sense, what is it? And man, when and I wouldn't let him out of the box, right? It's Joe. If it doesn't, I go, hey, Joe, if it doesn't make sense, Joe, what is it? And eventually Joe would say, nonsense. And I'd be like, yeah. Okay, we're done. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate your work.
Okay, so you have.
Listen. I say, I'm not here to disparage you, Joe. This is not, you should never do that to an employee ever. I said, but Joe, that doesn't make sense. And let me tell you something. He would never do it again. There wouldn't be a write-up. I wouldn't have to suspend him. I wouldn't have to discipline him. When people arrive at a conclusion on their own that something is nonsense, they stop doing it. They just stop. 99% of the time, you don't need to take another step. And where leaders fail the most is when they're setting direction, and it makes sense to do it. When the 20 that didn't do it don't do it, they want to write them up, they want to discipline them, they want to fire them. No, these people are important. They are the company, okay? Just so you know, they are the company, right? So if they did it, then the company did it. That's how it works, right? As a leader, your job is to get them to understand the ramifications of what that is to them personally, blah, blah. But every time I would sit down with them in person and get them to understand that what they just did was just nonsense on their own, not because I told them it was, when I had to ask them, so if it doesn't make sense, what is it? And then they'd say, well, it's bad. Nope. If it doesn't make sense, what is it? Oh, it's wrong. Nope. If it doesn't make sense, what's the opposite of making sense? Well, it's what's the opposite? When something makes sense, and I say when we're non-happy, we're happy.
That's leading the witness. That's leading it.
That's right.
Because I knew that when they arrived at it, it was going to change them indelibly, permanently. And so that's what that piece was intended to communicate.
You have hit so many points on that, Noel. This is, wow. Okay, so terms and conditions, number 1. Number 2, clear messaging. And number 3, direction. Otherwise, you get nonsense. You have, you sure you're not a stand-up? Your career is waiting for you as a stand-up comic, as someone who can audibly can record and present without having a recording device, because you can anticipate the future effects. Just to let you know. When you're done writing the book, we can go on to the next level. So some things that really resonated with me: responsible for setting direction. It really, to me, amplifies the issue that when you call them out and said, were you forced to become a supervisor? Did you, did anyone make you become a supervisor? And it sets example within the room, like you said. And to me, it really paralleled the concept of getting women on boards, of being women in leadership, because we've been talking so long for the fact that we have a void in the middle, that we just out, and then we go through the system, but we don't have enough of the ranks and fulfilling in the middle. You right there amplified that so well, and saying just in leadership and through turbulent times, the name of our podcast this morning is, you're talking about how each supervisor, it goes up, they ask for it, they wanted it, they earned it, they respect it, and they amplify it, and they continue to go with it. And then you came back and you said how you really amplify the fact that the 80-20 rule, where 80 people did not rule, but 80, followed the rules and 20 didn't. And you got them to break it down. Why? What was the purpose of it? And how to go, instead of, like you said, writing them up, taking all that extra time to write them up and, or fire them and whatever, you got them to understand one by one is the messaging to get them to absorb. So like you said, they never would do it again, because they are the company. They are the one that keeps the company running. And so many points that you hit on, but I just want to amplify those today on the call, that to our messaging for, going through this, that really parallels the women on boards, the leadership that's going through, our principles that, that Kelly sits on, regarding our leadership of so many different industries, how the integration is so powerful. Because if you break that down to not just being a particular industry, logistically, why UPS? You are the leader. The less heard, you are doing a phenomenal job, and that messaging is amplified where you're showing it right now. Just unbelievable. So, Kelly, anything you'd like to add to that?
Oh, absolutely. I think Noel hit it on the head. Direction is so important, obviously. And I think you mentioned it as well, Desiree. These leadership concepts can go across any industry, any nonprofit, even our diversity council, like you said, right? We need to make sure people understand terms and conditions, that our messaging is clear, and that we're setting direction. And I think it's so important, again, for any industry. So I appreciate, Noel, you taking the time today. It really gives us a taste for your book. So you better get hopping on writing that. So that's good.
Well, before we sign off, I really want to take it a couple things. I'd like to dedicate a few moments. here we are talking about turbulent times, and the incredible work that you've done, your 42 years. I'd like to re-amplify that. 42 years with one company. Who does that in today's world? That is unbelievable. And to share, starting where you did, all the way up the ranks, and continue to share and to continue to give back is so powerful, because we're in an age where we jump, career, or we jump, positions or companies so quickly, to really absorb and create a culture, so important. So I'd like to take this moment to really amplify and help not only our leaders and listeners and amplify this through so much bigger platform. Is, Noel, how is, you obviously retired now from UPS and you're writing your book. How can we help the consumer? How can we help the citizens? This is affecting us globally, that through these times of leading through turbulent times, we talked earlier about Kelly, her daughter now has to be a stay-at-home mom, a teacher in school, homeschooling, how to deal with still working at her job, or all that different things that are going on. How some of the things that can we apply turbulent times today?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I think, the point is, I was asked by you, thanks for that, to be on to talk to your membership and your listeners about leadership during turbulent times. And everything I talked about applies now on steroids. We don't need more indigestible messaging. We don't need less clarity. We don't need direction that's poor. And when you break it down for the person that's running a household, a mom, or a dad, a person that's running a household, or you run a business and you're in the middle of this pandemic. The things that I talked about today resonate even more. They're on steroids. They're not about business as usual. When I've gone through crisis, I've had to understand, a point that was made to me years and years ago. And it came from a person who I considered a great leader, and he was a great mentor. And I worked for him when I was in Chicago. And it was back in 2000, I think it was, about 20 years ago, where we were going through one of the most horrific snowstorms I'd ever been through. And it was right before December 25th. I think it hit on the 10th or 11th of December. And things have been great. And, that's the toughest time of the year for us. And all of a sudden we get like 36 inches of snow in 24 hours. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It paralyzed the city, shut us down. And customers don't really care about that. They think in some way,
nice,
yeah, they don't. They think in some way that even with 36 inches of snow that, we're UPS, my goodness, we should be able to do anything, right? And so in the media, so as time went on, it got harder and harder and harder. And, it was just a nightmare experience. In the media was all over this thing. And the media would come down to my office and they'd want interviews every day and updates every day. And, I did this one interview where there was like all these disgruntled customers waiting to get their stuff. And the reporter went over to them and did interviews with people that were in line, and man, they threw us under the bus bad. And it was like December 23rd or something. And so they asked me to come down, and I came down and I did this interview, and it made me look just awful. It made me look just awful. I mean, I'll tell you, I went home and it was on the news. It was on like the evening news, my interview. and all of my neighbors, people that knew me well, they would see me and go, hey, they put their hand over, hey, no, I don't want to be seen with you, right? Oh, it was so bad. It was so bad, right? But anyway, during that moment in time, I have to be very candid that the stress levels were as high as you could imagine for me personally, professionally. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to get all of this product delivered by Christmas Day. And right. I was pushing my people unbelievably and unreasonably hard. And I want to be very, very pointed on that point, that the place that I was pushing my people was just unreasonable. They were working as hard as they knew how to work, right? And instead of me appreciating just that, I was pushing them that we got to get this done.
Right.
So the person I worked for sat me down, and he could tell that, you know, the tone that I was at was just not okay. And he goes, "No, let me just tell you this. During a crisis, when you're the leader, you don't get to be human. You have to be superhuman. You don't get to be human. You don't get to have human failings. You don't get to have human lapses. You don't get to bring out human emotions. You need to be the stabilizing force. You need to be the person that everyone's looking at to gain confidence in themselves. You need to be the person that's patting them on the back, and you need to be encouraging them, because you can only do one or two things with a human. You can encourage them or discourage them. There's no middle. And that was 20 years ago. And my life, and I was a good leader, I felt then. And I would submit that I'm proud of my career. But at that moment in time, I was not being a good leader. At that moment in time, I was allowing that crisis to take me to push my people harder and than they were able to give. And they were giving everything they had. And so I think it's important that the listeners understand that in a crisis, all the things I just talked about, you have to be the lead encourager. And if you're not, then you're a discourager. Then you're discouraging them, period. Because you don't get to do a middle ground. You either get to encourage them or discourage them. That's it. So the things I mentioned before, you know, hopefully the listeners can take away from that you don't get to be human. You just don't. You don't get to bring your human baggage to the table. When you said, "I'm gonna be the leader," you agreed that you were going to respect your people all the time, not sometimes. And I'm a kind of respect them. I'm gonna respect them on Monday and not Tuesday. I'm gonna maybe 98 respect them, 98%. No, you agreed to respect them, and you agreed to train them, and you agreed to develop them, and you agreed to encourage them. And that means you didn't agree to discourage them, and you didn't agree to not train them, and you didn't agree to, you know, I mean, that may seem simple, but it's important. You agreed that when crisis comes, that you will be superhuman. And that's what you need to be during a crisis for your people. The place that they can come and feel good about where we're headed, right? It might be bad right now, it's tough right now, but you know what? I work for so-and-so. And at a minimum, I appreciate the leadership they're giving me directionally. And that's important for your listeners to understand. They own that narrative, not someone else, because when the position was open, they had their hand up. And so they own that. They raised their hand and said, "Pick me." And so now is a time where in their company, in their business, as the owner of their business, now is a time where that needs to make sense to the people that report under them, so that they don't see it as nonsense.
And you know what's exciting, I think, I'm sorry, Desiree, I was just going to say what's exciting is, you know, you really are seeing so many leaders step up from so many small businesses and from so many organizations, and so many women, right, stepping into those leadership roles like never before. And I think, you know, through every crisis, right, some good comes. And so maybe part of it will be that people will use some of these rules and step into that leadership role even stronger.
You know, thank you, Kelly. The thing that really strikes out, I mean, it hits me hard right now about your when you were talking, Noel, is about the front line as we're talking about the hospitals. You know, you're looking at the director of the hospital who is running the doctors and the nurses about, you know, having the PPE or having everything on board, and they're pushing them so hard, you know, to go in from taking care of the patients, not only the normal scheduled, you know, surgeries, but the the COVID-19, what's going on. You talk about here in Irvine, where our headquartered for NARB is that we have the #1 ventilators that are being made that are for the ICU units. They can only produce so many. They were up to, I think it was 250 a week, and they're now up to 500 a week. But they're pushing them, 24/7, 3 shifts making them. And the public and private parties are coming together. And when you're talking about getting that delivery out in time, for the holidays and pushing them, that was superhuman. And it was past the point. Taking that moment every day and thanking, I'm just visually, seeing this come alive right now, is taking that moment to thanking everyone as they come on staff, and saying thank you for helping everyone who's here, for showing up today and taking care of everyone, especially in a crisis. Because one report that I read just last night just really hit home. As is passing, that 1 minute they think they're fine, they're stabilized, and the next minute, literally in seconds, they go and they pass. And once they finally hit the buzzer and it's done, their ventilator is gone and moved to someone else, and they don't even have the time to absorb that 1 minute to reflect what just happened, that someone has just passed away. So when you talk about being on the front lines, you talk about, pushing the superhuman aspect. We can only relate to what's going on right now in leading, in the leaderships that are being put to the test, of the biggest test of their entire lives. To me,
no, I was going to say, yeah, that's right. The point, I watch TV like everyone else, and I'm seeing these hospitals where you got nurses standing out in front of the hospitals with signs going unsafe conditions, and that's leadership. That's leadership, because there's hospitals that have the same conditions and they're not out in front of them. That's leadership. And so, that goes to the heart of the matter that we're talking about. Is that's exactly right. The people that run the hospital, the CEO, the president, the CIO, the CFO, here's what they don't do. They don't serve patients. They're not in the room, in the emergency room, in the triage area. They're not doing that, right? And they're asking questions of the managers and the people that are responsible every day, and applying pressure to life and death situations. I mean, I can't even imagine. But what people don't need more than anything else is a lack of understanding, right? And a lack of information. Mm-hmm. And that goes to the whole crisis conversation. That's when the CIO and the presidents, and I'm sure a lot of them are doing this. This is not casting a broad brush against anything, but none of them should be distanced from where their people are, right? None of them should be removed from the theater where the nurse who's using the same mask for 3 days in a row or whatever, none of them should be removed from that. And that's the encouragement part, right? Because if they're not there, that's discouraging to the nurse and the doctor. And if they are there, that's encouraging, right? And that's really close to the point. What you're saying goes to that point.
Well, and I think never has there been a time when we've needed more encouragement. I mean, I think everybody's looking for encouragement, right? And I think that that's a leadership skill for everyone to understand, is that, we need encouragement, and we need to encourage each other right now. And we certainly don't need a lot of blame or backbiting or anything else. We need to encourage each other. There's going to be a lot of missteps. There's going to be things that work and don't work, but be the encourager,
That's correct. Yeah, well said.
Well, that leads us into your quote. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Absolutely. Well said. Both of you. Unbelievable. It leads us directly to our lack of clarity, poor communication, and leading from a distance in times.
Right. You're breaking up a little bit. Hopefully the recording will catch that, because you broke up just, Kelly, did she break up for you?
A little bit.
We were talking about that. Yeah. So let me reread that. Thank you very much for that, because I've been as the internet for everyone on the podcast. It was strictly even recording, doing this is that make sure, that was a good one. But the amount of time, so let's go back and redo this. The amount of times your people will support a lack of and you from a distance is none times. So to close it out, Noel, what can we amplify that, and what would you like to take away?
Yeah, that's my landing spot, right? This is my final word. You know, I talked about a number of things on this podcast, and again, I want to thank you for the privilege to be on it, and you know, Kelly, for recommending me to be on it. You know, thanks for that. You know, but just to go back through, we talked about leaders must understand the terms and conditions of the relationships with their people. Leaders must make certain that their messaging is clear. There's clarity, right? And validating, you know, through what all that is, we already talked about. And then leaders must set direction for the team. And my message is that when you don't do those three things, the amount of times your people will support a lack of clarity, poor communication, and you leading from a distance, the amount of times they're going to support that is none times. Okay, that's how many times they're going to support that behavior, is none times. And so as a leader, you can take that to the bank.
Thank you for that. That's been fantastic. So with that being closing, Kelly, would you like to add anything in here in a last closing out comment?
No, again, thank you, Noel, for being on. Thanks, Desiree, for giving the platform. And again, I really hope the listeners gain a lot from today's podcast.
Absolutely. And I am so excited. This will be posted on the website to making sure everyone gets it done, so you can listen to a recording for those of your friends and relatives and around the world to make sure you get a copy of this and play it again. But also I want to make sure that our podcast is at 8 a.m. every Wednesday, Pacific Standard Time. We're bringing to you know the rules of the game. And today for the Turbulent, leading through turbulent times is so powerful. And I've got to say, Noel, I am so grateful, and so grateful, Kelly, for introducing me to Noel, because to not only for my life and what this has brought to me, it is just brought circles around and the clarity of what is out there and going. So thank you both for being on the call for our podcast to know the rules of the game if they're leading through time. So again, best and stay healthy and be safe to everyone as we go through this, and please check in to see if there's anything we can help you. Again, I'm Desiree Patno, your host, and nawrb.com, where you can find us. And Noel, is there any way that you'd like to be able to have them communicate with you? You're an author and publisher. Is there a good way to connect with you?
Yeah, you know, I can be found on LinkedIn like most people, and I respond to those messages. I don't just look at and that's really the best way to reach out for me is through LinkedIn. Quite frankly, I do look at that. And then of course, my current website and a lot of the collateral that goes along with my book isn't up yet. It'll be up this summer, hopefully. But I would say to go on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions or, you know, any further dialogue that any of your membership would like to have.
Through LinkedIn, best for you too?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you all. Be safe and healthy. Again, thank you very much for the call, and I can't wait. So take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.